Hey guys, tonight we step into the dust and dreams of the California gold rush, where the promise of glittering riches pulls you thousands of miles from everything you know and quietly sets you up for one of the hardest experiences of your life. You're probably imagining striking gold within minutes, right? A shiny nugget just sitting there waiting for you. Yeah, about that. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments too. I always love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the edge of everything familiar, clutching a rumor. It's not even a proper fact yet, just whispers drifting across towns, carried in newspapers and exaggerated over drinks. Someone found gold in California, not just a little, but enough to make ordinary people rich overnight. Farmers abandon their fields, shopkeepers lock their doors midday, sailors jump ship. And you? Well, you decide you're not going to be the fool who stays behind. So you pack what little you have, or sell it entirely, and aim yourself west. This is 1849, and if you're part of this wave, they'll eventually call you a 49er. It sounds almost heroic, doesn't it? Like you're part of something legendary. And in a way, you are, but not in the way you're hoping. You picture California as a place of easy fortune, rivers lined with gold just waiting for your hands. You imagine yourself returning home, pockets heavy, life transformed, maybe a bigger house, maybe never working again. But right now, all you have is anticipation and a long road ahead. The journey itself already splits into choices, none of them good. You can go overland, months of walking, riding, and dragging wagons across plains, deserts, and mountains. Or you can go by sea, sailing all the way around South America, a journey so long it feels like circling the entire planet. There's also a third option, cutting through the jungles of Panama, which sounds shorter until you realize it involves disease, mud, and insects that seem personally offended by your existence. No matter what you choose, the first thing you lose is comfort. Your bed? Gone. Your routine? Gone. Even your sense of time starts to blur as days stretch into identical sequences of effort and exhaustion. If you go overland, you join a wagon train, creaking slowly across the vast interior. At first, it almost feels exciting. There's a sense of community, people laughing, sharing stories, all convinced they're heading toward greatness. But that fades. The terrain doesn't care about your dreams. The sun burns during the day, and the cold bites at night. Your food supplies, carefully packed at the beginning, start to dwindle faster than expected. Flour gets damp, meat spoils, water becomes something you think about constantly. One historical detail that often gets mentioned is that the overland journey could take 4 to 6 months, depending on your luck. That's half a year of your life spent just trying to arrive. And luck plays a bigger role than you'd like. A broken wagon wheel can delay you for days. A sick animal can ruin your pace. A wrong turn, or following someone who thinks they know a shortcut, can cost lives. There are real instances where entire groups suffered because they trusted bad advice about faster routes. Scholars still argue whether the sheer scale of migration during the gold rush was driven more by economic desperation or by something closer to mass psychological frenzy. Standing here, ankle-deep in dust, watching the endless line of wagons ahead of you, it definitely feels a bit like both. And then there's the strange, quieter details, like how people brought absurdly impractical things with them. Fine china, heavy furniture, even pianos. At the start, it all seems reasonable. You're not just traveling, you're relocating your life. But a few weeks in, those items become dead weight. You'll see them abandoned along the trail, scattered like breadcrumbs of regret. You learn quickly, anything that isn't essential becomes expendable, including, sometimes, relationships. Tension creeps in as supplies shrink and exhausting grows. Small disagreements turn sharp. Someone eats more than their share. Someone refuses to pull their weight. Out here, there's no authority, no real rules beyond what your group can enforce, and even that starts to fray. You begin to understand something uncomfortable. This journey isn't just about reaching gold, it's about enduring everything between you and it. And if you chose the sea route instead, things aren't exactly better. Imagine months on a cramped ship, the horizon unchanging, the air thick with salt and sickness. Food becomes monotonous and often rotten. Water turns stale. Storms roll in without warning, tossing the ship like a toy. People get seasick. People get fevers. Sometimes people don't recover. There's a peculiar detail sailors mention, how the smell below deck becomes something you never forget. A mix of sweat, damp wood, unwashed bodies, and illness. It clings to everything, even your thoughts. You start to realize that the dream of gold has already extracted its price, and you haven't even seen California yet. If you survive the journey, and that's still an if, you eventually arrive. And at first, it feels like stepping into a promise. California greets you not with paved streets or organized settlements, but with chaos. Tents everywhere, makeshift shelters, people rushing in every direction, each convinced they're just one step away from striking it rich. You're not alone here, not even close. By 1849, tens of thousands of people have poured into the region. Americans, Europeans, Latin Americans, Chinese immigrants, all converging on the same rivers, the same hills, the same fragile hope. The gold is real, that part isn't a lie. But what nobody emphasized back home is how quickly the easy gold disappears. You hear stories, always stories, about someone who found a fortune in days, a lucky strike, a miraculous discovery. These tales spread like wildfire, keeping everyone motivated. But you don't see those people. What you see instead are tired faces, men hunched over rivers, sifting endlessly through mud and gravel, camps that look more like temporary survival zones than places of opportunity. Still, you tell yourself you'll be different. You didn't come all this way to fail. So you pick a spot, any spot, and get to work. The tools are simple. A pan, maybe a shovel if you can afford one. You kneel by the river, dipping the pan into the cold water, swirling it carefully, hoping to catch that unmistakable glint. At first, every sparkle makes your heart jump, but most of it is nothing. Just reflections, just fool's gold, just your own expectations playing tricks on you. Hours pass, then days. Your hands grow rough, your back aches constantly. The water numbs your fingers until you can barely feel them. And still, you keep going, because stopping feels like admitting defeat. This is where the illusion starts to crack. You begin to understand that gold mining isn't a quick win, it's a grind, a slow, uncertain process where effort doesn't always equal reward. And yet, you stay. Because turning back now would mean facing the fact that everything you risked, the journey, the money, the comfort, might have been for nothing. So you keep kneeling in that river, swirling that pan, chasing that flicker of gold. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a quiet thought forms. Maybe this isn't the beginning of your fortune. Maybe this is the beginning of everything it's going to cost you. The road didn't break you completely, but it definitely tried. By the time you reach California, you're thinner, quieter, and far less certain about everything. That early excitement you carried at the start of the journey, it's still there, just buried under layers of fatigue, dust, and a growing suspicion that you've signed up for something much harder than advertised. And the worst part? The journey isn't really over, because now you have to survive the aftermath of it. You arrive thinking you'll finally rest, maybe find a decent place to sleep, eat something warm, gather your strength before chasing gold. Instead, you step into something that feels like a human storm. Tents stretch in every direction, flapping in the wind like loose sails. The ground is trampled into mud or baked into hard, cracked earth. People move constantly, carrying tools, arguing, trading, shouting over one another. There's no order, no structure, just a restless energy that never seems to settle. You quickly realize something important. Nobody was actually prepared for this many people. One widely accepted historical fact is that California's population exploded almost overnight during the gold rush. In 1848, it was sparsely populated. By the end of 1849, it had tens of thousands of newcomers flooding in, completely overwhelming any existing infrastructure. There aren't enough shelters, there isn't enough food, there definitely isn't enough patience. So you do what everyone else does. You adapt. Or at least you try to. Finding a place to sleep becomes your first challenge. If you didn't bring a proper tent, and even if you did, it might not matter much. Space is limited, and the best spots near water are already claimed. You might end up sleeping on uneven ground, wrapped in a thin blanket, listening to the constant noise of camp life around you. Coughing, snoring, the occasional argument that turns just loud enough to make you wonder if it'll escalate further. Sleep doesn't come easily here. Even when your body is exhausted, your mind stays alert. Every unfamiliar sound feels like something you should pay attention to. Out here, being unaware isn't just uncomfortable, it can be dangerous. And then there's the weather. California might sound warm and inviting, but the reality is less consistent. Days can be brutally hot, especially when you're out in the open, working under direct sunlight. Nights, on the other hand, can turn surprisingly cold, especially in the foothills and mountains. You don't really have the right clothes for either. Layers become your survival strategy, but even then, it's not enough. You sweat through your shirt during the day, then shiver in it at night. There's no real way to stay comfortable, only slightly less miserable. And while you're dealing with all of this, there's a constant pressure building in the background. You need to start earning. Because everything here costs more than you expected. A simple meal, something that would have been cheap back home, can cost several times as much in a mining camp. Eggs, for example, are famously overpriced during this time. There are accounts of eggs selling for $1 each, which might not sound like much now, but back then it was outrageous. It's one of those strange, almost absurd details. You traveled thousands of miles chasing gold, only to find yourself hesitating over the price of breakfast. And it's not just food. Tools are expensive. Clothes wear out quickly and need replacing. Even basic supplies like soap or candles feel like luxury items. Every coin you spend eats into your chances of making a profit. So you rush into mining faster than you probably should. There's no time to ease into it, no time to fully recover from the journey. The pressure to start digging, panning, searching, it's constant. Because if you don't, someone else will. You notice how quickly people become territorial. A patch of land near a river, a promising stretch of gravel, these aren't just locations anymore. They're opportunities. And opportunities here are guarded fiercely. There's no formal system in place at first, no official claims, no consistent enforcement, just a loose, often unwritten understanding that if you're working a spot, it's yours, until someone decides it isn't. Arguments flare up over boundaries that don't really exist. Voices rise. Sometimes it ends there. Sometimes it doesn't. Scholars still argue whether the early gold rush camps were more cooperative or competitive in nature. Standing here, watching two men shout over a few feet of riverbank, it feels like cooperation is always one bad day away from collapsing, and bad days are common. You start your own work early in the morning, when the light is soft and the air is still cool. You kneel by the water, dipping your pan, repeating the same motion over and over. Scoop, swirl, watch, hope. At first, it almost feels meditative, but that doesn't last. Your knees ache from the hard ground, your back stiffens from bending forward for hours. The cold water numbs your hands, making every movement slower and clumsier. And the results? Inconsistent at best. Maybe you find a few tiny flakes, barely visible, but enough to keep you going. Maybe you find nothing at all. The uncertainty is what gets to you, because no matter how hard you work, there's no guarantee it will pay off. You could spend an entire day from sunrise to sunset and end up with less than you need to buy dinner. That's when the doubt starts creeping in. Quiet at first, then louder. You look around at the others. Some seem confident, experienced. Others look just as lost as you feel. Everyone is chasing the same thing, but nobody really knows how long it will take or if it will happen at all. And yet the stories keep circulating. Someone struck gold upstream. Someone found a nugget the size of a walnut. Someone made enough in a week to go home rich. These stories are everywhere, repeated constantly, almost like a ritual. They keep hope alive. They keep people working. But there's something strange about them. You never quite meet the person they're about. It's always someone else, someone just out of reach, someone who left before you arrived. It creates this odd, almost dreamlike atmosphere where success feels both incredibly close and impossibly distant at the same time. And then there are the quieter moments, the ones that don't make it into the stories, like watching someone pack up their things after weeks of failure, their movements slow and resigned, or seeing a man sit by the river, staring into the water as if trying to convince himself to keep going. These moments linger with you because they feel more real than the success stories. There's also a peculiar habit that starts to develop among miners, talking to themselves. Not loudly, not in a way that draws attention, just small mutters, half-formed thoughts spoken out loud. It's a subtle detail, but it says a lot. Out here, with no real structure, no clear path, your mind starts to fill the silence however it can. And the silence, despite all the noise, is always there underneath. You begin to realize that this place doesn't just test your body. It tests your patience, your expectations, your ability to keep going when nothing seems to be working. And slowly, almost without noticing, your definition of success starts to change. At the beginning, you imagined striking it rich, finding enough gold to transform your life completely. Now, you'd settle for enough to cover your costs, enough to justify the journey, enough to make this feel like it wasn't a mistake. That shift is subtle, but it's important, because it marks the moment when the dream starts adjusting itself to reality. And reality here is relentless. Every day blends into the next, marked only by how much or how little you manage to find. Your body grows used to the discomfort, but it never really stops hurting. Your hands stay rough, your clothes stay dirty, and your thoughts start revolving around a single question. Is this worth it? You don't have an answer yet, so you keep working, because stopping would mean facing that question fully, and you're not sure you're ready for that. Not yet. Not when there's still a chance, however small, that the next pan, the next scoop, the next day might finally be the one that changes everything. At some point, without any clear announcement, the illusion finally gives way. Not all at once, not dramatically, it just fades. You wake up one morning, your body already aching before you even move, and the thought of heading back to the river doesn't feel exciting anymore. It feels routine, heavy, necessary. This is your life now. You eat something small, if you have it, and make your way to your spot, or at least the patch of land you've convinced yourself is still yours. The river looks the same as yesterday, same current, same scattered rocks, same quiet promise that maybe today will be different. But deep down, you already know how this usually goes. You kneel, dip the pan into the water, and begin again. Scoop, swirl, watch, over and over. This is placer mining, the simplest form of gold hunting, and the one most people like you rely on. No big machines, no complex tools, just patience, repetition, and a bit of luck. And mostly it's repetition. A widely known historical fact is that the early easy gold, what miners called surface gold, was quickly picked over within the first couple of years. By the time most 49ers arrived, including you, much of the easily accessible gold was already gone. What's left is harder to find. Smaller flakes, deeper deposits, gold that requires more effort than your basic pan can easily handle. But you didn't come here with advanced equipment. You came with hope and maybe a show. So you adapt. You start digging into the riverbank, hauling up heavier loads of dirt and gravel. You build a crude rocker box if you can, something that lets you process more material at once. It's not elegant, but it's more efficient. Still, more efficient doesn't mean effective. Your days stretch longer. What used to take a few hours now takes the entire day. You work from sunrise until the light fades, barely stopping except to eat or drink. And even then, those breaks feel rushed, almost guilty, because every minute you're not working feels like a minute wasted. And yet, the results barely improve. You might find a little more gold than before, but not enough to match the extra effort. It's like chasing something that keeps moving just out of reach. You start noticing patterns in the people around you. There are the optimists, the ones who keep talking about the big strike that's just around the corner. They laugh, they share stories, they keep the energy alive. Then there are the quiet ones. They don't talk much, they just work. Steady, methodical, almost mechanical. They've been here long enough to understand what this really is. And then there are the ones who are already giving up. You see it in how they move, slower, less focused. Their pans sit unused for longer stretches. They start talking about leaving, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. It's a spectrum of belief, and you're somewhere in the middle, still hopeful, but no longer certain. There's also a strange shift in how you think about time. Back home, days had structure, morning, afternoon, evening, each with its own rhythm. Here, everything blends together. The only real markers are how much gold you find and how tired you feel. Weeks pass without you fully registering them. You measure your life in pans of dirt, in small, glittering specks that may or may not be worth anything. And then there's the physical toll. It's not dramatic at first, just soreness, stiffness, the kind of discomfort you expect from hard work. But it builds. Your back starts to ache constantly, not just during work, but even when you lie down at night. Your hands develop blisters that harden into calluses only to crack open again with continued use. Your knees protest every time you kneel, which is often. You begin to move differently, more carefully, more slowly. Every action becomes deliberate, as if your body is quietly negotiating with you about how much it's willing to endure. There's an oddly specific detail that people don't always mention, how the constant bending and lifting can make you feel older than you are. Men in their 20s start moving like they're twice that age. You catch yourself doing it too, standing up with a slight groan, stretching your back before you even realize you're doing it. It's subtle, but it's there. And then there's the mental side, the monotony. At first, the repetitive nature of mining felt almost calming. Now it starts to wear on you. The same motions, the same sights, the same uncertain outcomes. It creates a kind of quiet frustration that never fully goes away. You begin to question everything, your decisions, your expectations, even the stories that brought you here in the first place. Scholars still argue whether most gold rush participants were truly chasing wealth or simply caught up in the momentum of the crowd. Sitting here, staring into a pan of muddy water, it feels like the line between those two things is thinner than anyone wants to admit. Because if you strip away the stories, the excitement, the promise, what you're left with is this: hard labor, uncertain reward, and a constant sense that you might be wasting your time. But you don't leave yet, because leaving feels like failure. And there's always that thought, that persistent, stubborn thought that maybe tomorrow will be different. Maybe you've just been unlucky so far. Maybe the gold is just a little deeper, a little further upstream, a little closer than you think. So you adjust your approach. You move to a new spot. You follow rumors. You listen to advice from people who sound like they know what they're doing, even if you're not entirely convinced. Sometimes it helps. Most of the time, it doesn't. And through it all, the environment itself starts to feel less like a backdrop and more like an opponent. The river is cold, relentless, always moving. The ground is uneven, stubborn, difficult to dig. The sun beats down without mercy during the day, and the nights offer little comfort. It's as if everything around you is quietly resisting your efforts. There's no partnership here, no sense that the land wants to give up its gold. You have to take it, and taking it is hard, very hard. You start to notice something else, too. The way people talk about gold changes over time. At the beginning, it's all excitement, big finds, life-changing discoveries, endless possibilities. Now, the conversations are more grounded. How much did you get today? Enough to cover food? Barely. Gold stops being a dream and becomes a calculation, an equation you're constantly trying to balance. Effort versus reward, time versus outcome. And most days, the numbers don't quite add up. Still, you keep going, because stopping means accepting that this might not work out. And that's a difficult thing to face when you've come this far, invested this much, endured so much already. So you return to the river, day after day, repeating the same motions, chasing the same glimmer. And every now and then, just often enough to keep you hooked, you find something. A slightly larger flake, a small nugget, enough to make your heart race again, just for a moment. Those moments are dangerous because they reset your hope. They make everything feel possible again, even when the reality hasn't really changed. And so the cycle continues. Work, hope, disappointment, repeat, until you start to wonder if this isn't just what life is now, not a path to fortune, but a loop you can't quite step out of. It starts with something small, a cough from the man sleeping a few feet away, just a dry, persistent sound that cuts through the night. You barely notice it at first. People cough all the time out here. Dust, cold air, exhaustion, it all adds up. But the cough doesn't go away. It gets worse. And then, a few days later, someone else starts coughing too. That's when you begin to understand something you probably should have considered earlier. This place isn't just physically demanding, it's unhealthy. Deeply, constantly, inescapably unhealthy. The camps are crowded, far more than they were ever meant to be. Tents packed close together, makeshift shelters built without any real plan, people moving in and out constantly. There's no real system for waste, no sanitation infrastructure, no reliable source of clean water. Everything mixes together in ways it shouldn't. Drinking water comes from the same rivers you're mining in, the same rivers where people wash their clothes, clean their tools, and sometimes dump things they really shouldn't. It's not exactly a recipe for good health. One widely documented historical fact is that diseases like dysentery, cholera, and typhoid fever spread rapidly through gold rush camps due to poor sanitation and contaminated water supplies. You don't need a doctor to tell you that something's wrong. You can see it. People start looking off, paler than usual, slower in their movements, less talkative. That constant energy, the restless drive that filled the camps when you first arrived, begins to fade in pockets. In its place, there's fatigue, and something else, something heavier. At first, it's easy to ignore. You focus on your work, your own survival, your own chances of finding gold. It feels practical, even necessary, to keep your attention narrow. But the signs keep appearing. Someone doesn't show up to the river one morning, then another. Then you hear quiet conversations, low voices, serious tones. Someone's sick. Someone's getting worse. Someone isn't expected to recover. And just like that, the idea of illness stops being abstract. It becomes personal. There's an odd detail about these camps that people don't always mention: how quickly they adapt to loss. Not because they don't care, but because they have to. Life here doesn't pause. If someone dies, there's no elaborate ceremony, no extended mourning, maybe a few words, maybe a small burial nearby. And then work resumes, because it has to. That's the unspoken rule of this place. Survival doesn't wait. And that realization sits uneasily with you. You start paying more attention to your own body. Every cough feels suspicious. Every headache lingers a little longer in your mind. You notice how often you're tired, how your energy dips even when you've had what passes for a full night's rest. And then there's the water. You can't stop thinking about it now. You watch it flow past, clear on the surface, but carrying who knows what beneath. You drink it because you have to. There aren't many alternatives, but every sip comes with a quiet question: what else am I taking in right now? You try small precautions, boiling water when you can, keeping your tools a bit cleaner, avoiding obvious contamination, but it's difficult to stay consistent when you're already stretched thin. Because everything here demands your time, and your energy, and your attention, and health, strangely enough, becomes just another thing you have to manage without really having the resources to do so. There's also the injuries, not dramatic, heroic ones, just the kind that come from constant physical labor. Cuts from sharp rocks, bruises from slipping on wet ground, strains from lifting more than you should. At home, these would be minor inconveniences. Here, they're risks, because even a small cut can become infected. Even a mild strain can limit your ability to work, and if you can't work, you can't earn. You start treating your body like something fragile, not because it is necessarily, but because you can't afford it not to be. Scholars still argue whether the Gold Rush camps had any meaningful sense of community health awareness, or if survival instincts simply overrode those concerns. From where you're standing, it feels like people know the risks, but don't have the luxury to fully address them. There's always something more immediate to deal with, more pressing, more urgent, like finding enough gold to eat, or securing a better spot before someone else takes it. Health becomes reactive instead of proactive. You deal with problems as they appear, not before. And sometimes, by the time they appear, it's already too late. You notice how people start carrying small remedies, basic medicines if they can get them, quinine for fevers, simple bandages, anything that offers even a slight advantage. But supplies are limited, and knowledge is inconsistent. Everyone has advice. Not all of it is helpful. You hear suggestions passed around like campfire stories. Drink this, avoid that, try this method. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. It's hard to tell which is which. And in the middle of all this, the environment keeps pressing in. The dust during dry days gets everywhere, in your lungs, your eyes, your food. When it rains, everything turns to mud, trapping moisture and creating new problems. There's no clean escape, no place where things feel controlled. You're always adjusting, always reacting, always trying to stay just ahead of whatever comes next. And yet, despite everything, you keep going back to the river. Because what's the alternative? Stopping doesn't make you healthier. It just leaves you without income, without purpose, without a reason to stay. So you keep working, even when you're tired, even when you're not feeling your best, even when part of you wonders if you should take a break. Because breaks feel risky too. Time away from the river is time not earning. Time not earning is time falling behind. And falling behind here can be just as dangerous as getting sick. There's a moment, quiet, almost easy to miss, when you realize how much your priorities have shifted. Back home, health was something you assumed, something stable, reliable, part of the background of your life. Here, it's uncertain, conditional, something you think about daily, sometimes hourly. You start to measure your well being in small victories. I don't feel worse today. I still have energy. I can keep working. That becomes enough, more than enough sometimes, because you've seen what happens when it isn't. You've seen the coughs that don't go away, the fatigue that deepens, the people who slowly disappear from the routine of camp life. And you understand, in a way you didn't before, that the gold rush isn't just testing your ability to find gold, it's testing your ability to endure, physically, mentally, day after day in conditions that quietly wear you down. And the unsettling part? You don't know how long you can keep this up. But you do know one thing. Tomorrow, you'll still walk back to that river, still kneel in the cold water, still chase that flicker of gold. Because for now, at least, continuing feels easier than stopping, even if continuing comes with a cost you're only just beginning to understand. Hunger doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in. At first, it's just a slight edge to your appetite. You finish your meal, if you can call it that, and still feel like something's missing. You tell yourself it's nothing, just the extra work, the long hours, your body adjusting. But then the meals get smaller. Not by choice, by necessity. Food here isn't just scarce, it's expensive in a way that feels almost insulting. You came chasing gold, thinking you'd be earning money, not watching it disappear on basic survival. And yet, here you are, staring at a handful of supplies, mentally calculating how long you can stretch them. One of the most commonly cited historical details is how wildly inflated prices became in mining camps. Simple staples, flour, beans, coffee, could cost several times what they did elsewhere. Eggs, famously, could go for $1 each, and sometimes even more depending on availability. It's the kind of detail that sounds almost funny if you weren't living it. You pick up an egg, turning it over in your hand, knowing that eating it feels like spending more than you should. So you put it back. That becomes a pattern. You start making small decisions like that all the time, skipping certain foods, choosing the cheaper, less satisfying options, stretching meals as far as they'll go. And the effect builds. Your energy dips. Not dramatically at first, just enough that you notice it while working. Your arms feel heavier, your movements slower. The river seems colder, the day longer. You tell yourself you just need rest, but rest doesn't fix hunger. And hunger doesn't just affect your body, it affects your thinking. You find yourself distracted more easily, irritated by small things. Conversations feel shorter, sharper. Even your thoughts start revolving around food in a way that feels constant. You think about what you used to eat back home. Full meals, warm meals, meals that didn't require calculation or compromise. Now, every bite feels like a decision. There's also the issue of variety, or rather, the lack of it. Your diet becomes repetitive. Beans, hard bread, maybe some salted meat if you're lucky. Coffee, when you can afford it, becomes less of a luxury and more of a necessity. Not because it fills you up, but because it gives you just enough of a boost to keep going. There's an oddly specific detail miners often mention, how quickly you get tired of the same foods, even when you know you can't afford to be picky. You choose slowly, not because you want to savor it, but because you're trying to make it last. Meals become quieter, less about enjoyment, more about function, fuel, not comfort, and sometimes not even enough of that. You start noticing the signs in others too. The way people eat faster when they finally have something decent, the way they guard their supplies a little more closely, the occasional tension when food is shared or not shared. Because hunger has a way of changing social dynamics. It makes generosity harder. Not impossible, but harder. You still see moments of kindness, someone offering a portion of their meal, someone sharing coffee. These moments stand out more now, precisely because they come at a cost. Giving food here isn't casual, it's a choice, a meaningful one. Scholars still argue whether the gold rush camps fostered cooperation or competition when it came to resources like food. From where you're sitting, trying to stretch a modest meal into something satisfying, it feels like people exist somewhere in between, willing to help, but aware of their own limits. And those limits are constantly being tested. You try different strategies, buying in bulk when you can, hoping it'll be cheaper in the long run. It helps sometimes. Other times, your supplies spoil before you can use them. Teaming up with others to share costs. This works better, at least for a while, but it also means relying on people you might not fully trust or who might not fully trust you. There's no perfect solution, just temporary ones. And then there are the days when you simply don't have enough, when your meal is noticeably smaller than it should be, when you tell yourself it's fine, you'll make up for it tomorrow, even though you know tomorrow might look exactly the same. Those days are harder. Work feels heavier, your patience shorter, your thoughts narrower. Everything starts revolving around getting through the day, just the day, not the week, not the future, just today. There's also a psychological shift that comes with this. At the beginning, gold was the goal. Now it's a means, a way to eat, a way to maintain some level of stability. You find yourself calculating constantly. If I get this much gold today, I can afford that. If I don't, I'll have to cut back again. It turns your entire experience into a kind of quiet math problem, one where the numbers don't always cooperate. And then there's the market itself. It's unpredictable. Prices fluctuate based on supply, demand, and sometimes pure chance. A shipment arrives and suddenly things are cheaper. For a moment, then it's gone and prices climb again. You learn to watch these patterns, to anticipate them as best you can, but you're always reacting more than controlling, always adjusting to conditions you didn't choose. And through all of this, your body keeps sending signals: hunger, fatigue, a general sense that you're running on less than you should be. You push through it because you have to, because stopping doesn't solve the problem, because somewhere in your mind there's still that belief that if you can just find enough gold, you can stabilize things, eat properly, rest properly, maybe even feel something close to comfortable again. But that enough keeps shifting, always just a little further away. There's a moment sitting by your camp one evening when it really hits you. You're eating slowly, carefully, trying to make the meal last. Around you, others are doing the same. The usual noise of the camp feels quieter tonight, more subdued, and you realize something simple but heavy. You didn't expect this part. You expected hard work, you expected challenges, but you didn't expect to feel drained in this specific way. Like you're constantly running a little low, a little behind, a little less than you were before. And yet, you're still here, still working, still chasing that glimmer in the river. Because even now, with hunger sitting quietly in the background, the possibility of finding gold hasn't disappeared. It's just changed. Less like a dream, more like a necessity. And so, the next morning, you get up again. You eat what you can, you head back to the river, and you keep going. Because for now, that's the only option that feels like moving forward. At first, the tension feels like background noise. Just raised voices here and there, the occasional argument over space, tools, or whose turn it is to use a particular stretch of river. Nothing too unusual considering the conditions. But over time, you start to notice a pattern. The arguments don't really go away. They build. Because this place, this entire experience, operates without much structure. There's no consistent law enforcement, no reliable authority watching over the camps. Rules exist, but they're informal, often changing depending on who's around and what they're willing to tolerate. And that creates a certain kind of environment, one where things can escalate quickly. You see it one afternoon. Two men arguing over a claim, just a narrow strip of riverbank, nothing remarkable at first glance. But to them, it represents opportunity, survival, maybe even a chance at something better. Voices rise, hands gesture sharply. A small crowd gathers, not necessarily to intervene, but to watch, to witness. Because situations like this aren't rare, they're part of the rhythm here. Sometimes it ends with words, other times it doesn't. You don't always see what happens next, but you hear about it later. A fight, someone injured, occasionally something worse. It leaves an impression because it reminds you how thin the line is between cooperation and conflict. One well-established historical fact is that during the early gold rush, many mining camps developed their own informal systems of justice, often called miners' courts, to resolve disputes. These weren't official legal institutions, but rather community-driven attempts to maintain order. It sounds reassuring in theory. In practice, it's inconsistent. Some camps handle disputes fairly, or at least try to. Others lean heavily on whoever has the most influence, the loudest voice, or the most allies. Fairness becomes subjective, situational, and sometimes entirely absent. You learn to be cautious, not overly friendly, not overly distant, just enough interaction to get by without drawing unnecessary attention. Trust becomes something you give in small amounts, carefully, and only when it feels necessary, because trust, like everything else here, carries risk. There's also theft. Not constant, not everywhere, but frequent enough that you're always aware of it. Small items go missing, tools, supplies, occasionally even gold. You start keeping your belongings closer, sleeping a little lighter, checking your things more often than you used to. It becomes a habit, not paranoia exactly, but something close. There's a strange detail that stands out over time, how quickly people adapt to this level of uncertainty. What would have felt alarming back home starts to feel almost normal here. You hear about something being stolen, and instead of shock, your first thought is, that makes sense. That shift is subtle, but significant. It means your expectations have changed. You're no longer assuming things will go smoothly. You're preparing for when they don't. And then there are the cultural tensions. This isn't just a gathering of people from one place. It's a convergence of individuals from all over the world, different languages, customs, expectations. Americans, Mexicans, Chileans, Chinese immigrants, Europeans, all drawn here by the same promise. At first, it feels almost exciting, a mix of perspectives, experiences, stories. But under pressure, differences can become points of friction. Misunderstandings happen, sometimes small, sometimes not. Competition for resources, land, water, gold, intensifies those tensions. It's not always about personal dislike. Often it's about survival, about who gets access, who gets to stay, who gets pushed out. Scholars still argue whether the diversity of the Gold Rush camps led to greater cultural exchange or deeper divisions. From where you stand, watching groups cluster together, speaking in familiar languages, it feels like both are happening at once. Connection and separation, side by side. You find yourself navigating these dynamics carefully, choosing when to engage, when to stay quiet, when to move on. It's not about avoiding people entirely, it's about understanding the environment you're in. Because this environment doesn't forgive careless decisions. Even something as simple as choosing where to work can have consequences. You hear stories of claims being jumped, taken over by someone else when the original miner steps away. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's direct. Either way, it forces you to think strategically. Do you stay at your spot all day guarding it? Do you risk leaving to rest, eat, or gather supplies? Every choice has a trade-off. There's no perfect option. And that constant calculation adds another layer to your already crowded mind. It's not just about finding gold anymore. It's about keeping it, protecting it, ensuring that your effort simply doesn't benefit someone else. You also notice how people carry themselves differently over time. Postures shift, eyes become more alert, movements more deliberate. There's a kind of quiet vigilance that settles over the camp. Not fear exactly, but awareness. You're always paying attention to people, to situations, to subtle changes in tone or behavior, because those changes can signal something important, something you need to respond to. And yet, despite all of this, life continues, work continues, because it has to. The river doesn't pause for conflict. The search for gold doesn't stop because tensions rise. If anything, the pressure makes people work harder, faster, as if trying to get ahead of whatever might come next. There are still moments of normalcy, conversations around small fires, shared stories, occasional laughter that cuts through the tension, reminding you that not everything here is strained or uncertain. But those moments feel shorter, more fragile, like they could disappear at any time. And that awareness changes how you experience them. You appreciate them more, maybe, but you also hold on to them less tightly, knowing they might not last. There's a moment, late one evening, when you're sitting quietly looking out over the camp. The noise has settled into a low hum. Fires flicker in the distance. Shadows move as people go about their routines. And you realize something. This place isn't just physically demanding. It's socially complex in a way you didn't expect. You're constantly navigating not just the land, but the people on it, their intentions, their needs, their limits, and your own. It's another layer of effort, another form of exhaustion, one that doesn't show up in your muscles, but in your thoughts, in the way you approach each day, carefully, deliberately, always a little on edge. And yet, the next morning, you wake up and do it all again. You check your belongings, you make your way to the river, you start working. Because despite the tension, the uncertainty, the constant low-level risk, you're still here for the same reason you were at the beginning. That flicker of gold, that possibility, however distant, that it might all be worth it. Even if, deep down, you're starting to suspect that the cost is adding up faster than the reward. At some point, the question stops being, when will I strike gold? And quietly becomes, how much longer can I keep doing this? It's not a dramatic shift. There's no single moment where everything suddenly changes. It builds slowly, layered over weeks, maybe months of effort, uncertainty, and that constant sense of being just a little behind. You still go to the river. You still kneel, still sift, still watch for that glimmer. But something inside you has adjusted. The excitement that once drove you here has thinned out, replaced by something steadier and heavier. Determination, maybe, or stubbornness. It's hard to tell the difference anymore. Because by now, you've invested too much to walk away easily. Time, energy, money, pieces of yourself you didn't realize you were spending. And for what? You start doing the math more seriously. Not just day-to-day survival, but the bigger picture. How much gold have you actually found? How much have you spent on food, tools, supplies? How much would it cost to go back home? That last one lingers, because leaving isn't simple. It requires resources, money, time, planning, and those are exactly the things you've been struggling to maintain. The idea of going back empty-handed feels heavy enough, but the idea of not being able to afford to leave feels heavier. So you stay, at least for now. One commonly accepted historical truth is that the vast majority of gold rush participants never became rich. In fact, many ended up earning less than they spent just trying to survive in the mining camps. You can feel that truth settling in around you, not as a statistic, as a reality. You see it in the people who quietly disappear from the camp, not because they've struck gold and left triumphantly, but because they've run out of options. They sell what little they have, pack lightly, and head back the way they came, changed in ways that aren't always visible. There's a peculiar detail in how people talk about leaving. They don't frame it as failure, not directly. They say things like, "I've had my run," or "It's time to try something else." The language softens the reality, gives it a shape that's easier to accept. But underneath, you can hear it, the weight of expectation meeting the limits of reality. And you wonder, quietly, when, or if, that moment will come for you. You think back to the beginning, to the excitement, the stories, the way this place felt like an opportunity, almost guaranteed. It's strange looking at it now, not because those stories were entirely false, the gold is real after all, but because they left out so much. The exhaustion, the hunger, the tension, the quiet, persistent uncertainty. Scholars still argue whether the gold rush should be remembered as an era of opportunity or exploitation, of dreams fulfilled or illusions sold. Sitting here, brushing dirt from your hands, it feels like it was always both. Opportunity for some, illusion for many, and you're somewhere in between. You haven't failed, but you haven't succeeded in the way you imagined either. You've endured. That's something. More than you expected, maybe, less than you hoped for. There's also a shift in how you see gold itself. At the beginning, it was everything. The goal, the dream, the reason for all of this. Now it feels smaller. Not less valuable exactly, but less powerful. You've seen what it takes to get even a little of it. You've felt the cost, and that changes how you think about it. A small nugget in your hand doesn't just represent wealth anymore. It represents hours of labor, days of uncertainty, weeks of persistence. It's tangible proof of effort, but also a reminder of everything that effort required. There's a moment, quiet, reflective, when you realize something important. You're not the same person who arrived here. That version of you was lighter, more certain, more willing to believe in the simplest version of the story. Now you carry more weight, experience, perspective, a clearer understanding of how things actually work here. And while that understanding isn't exactly comforting, it's grounding. It replaces illusion with reality, and reality, even when it's difficult, has a certain steadiness to it. You start thinking about what comes next, not just tomorrow or the next day, but beyond this. Do you keep mining? Try a different approach? Leave? Each option has its own set of uncertainties. There's no obvious answer, no clear path, just choices, each with their own risks. And yet, the idea of choosing, of deciding, feels different now than it did at the beginning. Back then, it was driven by excitement. Now, it's driven by understanding. You know what this place demands. You know what it gives. And you know, perhaps more importantly, what it doesn't. That knowledge doesn't make the decision easier, but it makes it more honest. You look around one more time, at the river, at the camp, at the people still working, still chasing, still hoping, and you feel a kind of quiet connection to them, not because you share the same outcome, but because you've shared the same experience, the same effort, the same uncertainty, the same long, complicated journey from expectation to reality. And that matters, even if it's not what you came here for. So you stand there for a moment, letting it all settle. The sounds, the sights, the weight of it all. And then, slowly, you turn back to your work, Or maybe, just maybe, you start thinking about the road home. Either way, one thing is clear. This wasn't the simple story you were told. It was harder, messier, more demanding in ways you couldn't have predicted. And while the dream of gold brought you here, what you found instead was something else entirely, something less shiny, but far more real. As the night settles in, you let the noise of the camp fade into something softer. The river, once a place of constant effort, now becomes just a gentle, steady sound in the background. The same water you worked in all day now moves quietly, reflecting faint hints of starlight. You sit back, or maybe lie down, feeling the weight of the day slowly ease off your shoulders. Not completely, just enough. Your hands, rough and tired, finally get a moment to rest. Your back relaxes, inch by inch, as if it's been waiting all day for this exact moment. Around you, the camp grows quieter. Voices lower, movements slow. Even the tension that seemed ever present during the day softens into something more manageable. And in this quieter space, your thoughts begin to drift. Not to the calculations, not to the worries, but to something simpler. The journey itself. The fact that you made it this far, across miles of land or sea, through uncertainty, discomfort, and all the small challenges that added up along the way. You didn't just chase a dream, you lived through something real, something difficult, something that changed you, even if you're still figuring out how. The gold, whether you found it or not, feels less important in this moment. What stays with you is the experience, the quiet resilience you didn't know you had, the way you kept going, even when things didn't go the way you planned. And as you settle in, letting your breathing slow, the world around you feels just a little more distant, a little softer. The river continues its steady rhythm, the night air cools gently, and for the first time in a while, there's no need to rush, no need to calculate, no need to push forward, just this moment. Calm, still, enough. You close your eyes, letting that feeling settle in, and whatever tomorrow brings can wait.